What can you say about my next guest? I'm Marky Billson, Tri-City Sports Now, but Bobby Bowden has more victories than any other living head college football coach in big-time college football. And I like to have on one of the former coaches of a team that Tennessee is going to play. I influence, and certainly Bobby Bowden has had an influence on hundreds of players' lives, thousands even. But for me, I recall listening to an interview you did years ago with my hero from Pittsburgh, Myron Cope, where you said he had a beautiful voice. For those who don't know, it was very heavily accented. Every time I talk to someone who has a heavy accent and it's a case of, wanting to make a good impression or, there's a little bit of a problem understanding or something, I always use that line, Bobby Bowden, your beautiful voice and such. A lot to me to have you on right here. Bobby Bowden, I know you're going to go to the Florida State-Virginia Tech game, but tell us what you're doing these days in retirement. I know you got some DVDs out, but what are your activities now, Bobby Bowden?
Well, I've been retired now for 8 years, but yet I'm not retired. I still speak a lot. I'm in several national speaking organizations, and I speak to, group, corporations, but I speak also to a lot of churches, and I also speak a lot to the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. That's kind of my favorite,
Yeah.
But anybody that pays, I talk.
Well, one of the things you mentioned, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, I'm reminded of how the greatest head coach in the history of East actually left ETSU for a period of time to work and speak with Fellowship of Christian Athletes. So in terms of around here, you're following into a lot of great footsteps, but there are some local ties, I think, that you have here, right here in the Tri-Cities that I want to get to. Now, you're going to be going to the Virginia Tech game, of course, on Monday. But are you familiar with the coordinator at Florida State, now the head?
Went for it. It was on about 30-yard line. They went for it. A lot of people would not have. And I had a feeling what they was going to do. They're going to take the ball and hit the fullback in the flat. I tried to get word to my defensive coordinator that's what they're going to do. And he did it, made a first down, and they beat us. But I thought Randy did a great job.
That was the first game that he was the offensive coordinator. Members Martin to Peerless Price for the winning touchdown on a long bomb. But that's quite an interesting plays of that Fiesta Bowl of long ago. I want to really bring you back, though. One of the things is that I know you were at West Virginia, and I think that some of the challenges that you faced when you were there, taking over the job in 1970, might be similar to what Randy Sanders has at ETSU. But before I do, I wanted to ask you this. Do you by any chance remember when you were at West Virginia, an administrator in the athletic department, high school football coaching resume in the Tri-Cities? Do you have any memories or of Ed Shockey?
Ed Shockey?
Yes.
In charge of football. He was my right-hand man, and he was a wonderful man.
Dobyns-Bennett won 2 state championships with Ed Shockey, and traditionally, although they've just been passed, Dobyns-Bennett was the winningest high school football team in Tennessee. They're up in Kingsport, Tennessee. Anyway, Ed Shockey won a couple of state titles there in 45 and 47 before he became the administrator, I know, for many years at West Virginia and such. And so I did want to ask, when you came into West Virginia, people don't realize this. West Virginia was leaving the Southern Conference. Now, I know you didn't coach West Virginia when they were in the Southern Conference, but what was that like? This is a transition that I think we could make very similar to what Appalachian maybe that any.
We were in the Southern Conference. We were in the Southern Conference when I went up there as an assistant coach.
Okay.
I went up there as offensive coordinator to Jim Carlin, who's from Tennessee, and played at Georgia Tech.
And Carlin also coached South Carolina and the Heisman Trophy winner.
South Carolina. He became the head coach. He hired me as his offensive coordinator, and so that's kind of back when you're talking about, I believe.
Yeah, I just was curious. What was the decision for West Virginia to go from the Southern Conference to try to make it as a major independent? Because, like I said, that's what a lot of schools around here are right now trying to do. What was the motivation?
I think the Southern Conference just kind of, I guess, too many teams broke off from it. Virginia Tech was there, and all of a sudden we started playing a more national schedule. We ended up playing California and Baylor and
Mm-hmm.
SMU and Illinois, and we started playing more of a national schedule. We always played Syracuse, Pitt, and Penn State,
Sure.
but it was a little bit different in the Southern Conference.
Yeah, and I know that, you mentioned the Southern Conference. I mean, in '65, George Washington drops football. They were in the Southern Conference. For ETSU fans, you got to ETSU back then was in the Ohio Valley Conference. They joined the SoCon in the late '70s, which turned out to be a pretty good move for ETSU. But I just am mentioning that because, consider this, that West Virginia, who Tennessee is a 10-point transition. And you kind of did, I think, the same thing at Florida State. Florida State, everybody knows, was really down. I think they had only won, 3 games over a course of time before you got there and turned them around. But what is the key to turning around a college football program the way that you did? What was the most important factor?
Well, the most important thing is you're in the state of Florida.
Sure.
That's where all the players are. I mean, you take the leading state in the production of college football players, especially Division I. Number one's California because they got all that such a big population. And number 2 is Texas, and Florida's just about one player behind Texas. So there are plenty of players down here, and if you can get your share, you're going to win. Look at South Florida. Did you see them play last night?
I'm familiar with what Central Florida did, but tell us about South Florida.
Central Florida. Yeah, they go undefeated last year, and they're not Miami, Florida State, or Florida. But FAU and FIU and all these other South Florida, there's just so many players down here. They're furnishing excellent players, all of them. And so anyway, I was fortunate enough to come into a state that had plenty of prospects.
And I want to mention, there were 201 players from the state of Florida on NFL rosters last year on opening day. That actually was number 1 in all of the NFL, even more than Texas and California. And it's one of the things, USA Football. And so I'm looking forward to the rankings that'll come out in about a week on who makes the rosters in a couple of days and all this. But Florida had 201 and Tennessee had 33. And this is, I've always said, one of the reasons and the primary reason why Florida has dominated Tennessee over the last few years and such, over the last 25 years or such. We're talking to Bobby Bowden. Let me ask you, though, when you were at West Virginia, and I want to kind of look to that because that's who the Vols are playing and such, and I know you have fond memories. Morgantown was close to, at that time, big-time football recruiting hotbeds. I know that when you were there, the 2 top counties for developing football players were Jefferson County in Ohio, that's Steubenville, right by the West Virginia Panhandle, and Beaver County, where Tony Dorsett and Joe Namath, Mike Ditka, those guys, that's in suburban Pittsburgh. And so let me ask this. What is it like, trying to get a player like that, a neighboring state, to come and play over the border and such? What's the recruiting tactic that you tried to use back then? Because you did have success at West Virginia, I know. And so, how did you get those players from Ohio and Pennsylvania to come to WVU?
Well, that's very important because there are not enough players in West Virginia to win with. Now, there probably would be
Sure. Well, what about John Majors?
Yeah, when Johnny came to Pitt, he turned that thing around and they won a national championship, before he left and came to Tennessee. Yeah, but that was back when Western Pennsylvania was Western Pennsylvania. Not like that now. I don't know if you've been to Pittsburgh in the last 20 years, but it don't look like Pittsburgh.
I'm a former sports writer for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, as a matter of fact, Bobby Bowden.
Oh, you would know that. Because you remember when I was there, you going down that river, there was the factories all up and down. You couldn't see the river from the factories.
Sure.
Now you go there and the factories are gone, And so a lot of those good players are gone too, I wouldn't be surprised if Eastern Pennsylvania might be more productive than Western now.
Well, I still have, being from there, some pride, but yeah, the city has gone to more, internet and educational in terms of employment than it has been the old factories. And in fact, I could show you some neighborhoods where soccer, certainly in the actual city is termed, but I'm in East Tennessee right now, so that's another topic for another market, I guess. I do want to ask you, about you mentioned in Florida the players were there. Do you think that if you had stayed at West Virginia, you could have had that sort of success, though, that you could have won a national title or competed for one like the way Don Nalen did?
Well, you say could West Virginia?
Yes.
If you get the great play, the name of the game, getting the best players.
Sure.
Alabama is getting the best players. That's why he's winning. And as long as he can get the best players, he's going to win. Now, you get the best players, a coach can mess that up, But usually, my theory was very simple. Whoever gets the best players are going to win, But like I say, a coach can mess that up. But West Virginia, about 10 years ago, when Roderick was there, they came out, about second, third, or fourth in the nation.
Mm-hmm.
And that was as close as they could get.
I do want to ask you, because I know you're very familiar with Alabama. We all know about the scrapbook that you used to keep and such, Bobby Bowden. But why do you think Nick Saban gets the players? I see Nick Saban. I see a surly guy. I see a lot of closed practices. I see, trying to prevent Brandon Kennedy from transferring to Tennessee eventually, or even Auburn. Why do you think Nick Saban continues to get these quality players when that's the environment at Alabama?
Well, number one, that's Alabama. That's the history of Alabama.
Okay.
That's the tradition of Alabama. Hey, who can you name it coached Alabama that didn't win a national championship? Frank Thomas won one back in the 30s.
Mm-hmm.
Wallace Wade, he used to take Alabama to the Rose Bowl. That was back when the days of winner of the Alabama-Tennessee game would go to the Rose Bowl.
Yes, they still have that in the fight song, I believe, that was written in 26, Go to the Rose Bowl, in the Alabama fight song. But yeah.
So Saban, number one, has got one of the best jobs in the country, but he is also probably, in my opinion, he's probably the best coach in the country as far as teaching how to play football and then recruiting the best players. There's a key to that. You have to be able to evaluate. You can go out and sign all these 5 stars you want to. They might not be real good. That might be a television ploy or a sports writer talking about how good they are. But he does a great job of evaluating.
There's one article up there that the Saban would provide, or a Jeremy Pruitt now at Tennessee, not letting the coordinators speak, or closing a lot of practices. I got to admit, I don't know how you did it at Florida State. I do know Florida State would credential. They were ahead of the curve in credentialing internet media. I do know that. But I wanted to ask you, I look at what happened at Maryland with those practices and a player actually dying.
Yeah.
Are we too militaristic? Are we too closed door in college football, in your opinion?
Well, you'd have to say that some are, but I think you'd have to
Really? Okay.
And but it isn't. I used to get scared every July when every August when we'd start football practice. I used to worry every day about somebody getting having a heart attack or getting a heat stroke.
Sure.
Alabama has a situation now. You go into their locker room and they and they're full of ice. And every player, when he gets through with practice, has to go in and sit down in that tub of ice. They make them do that just to be sure their body cools off. That is something that's scaring us nowadays.
I want to ask this. I'd mentioned, how you were the head coach at West Virginia when they were becoming a national program, and you mentioned, hey, look, I just was fortunate to be in the right place, right time with the boom of population in Florida when I went to Florida State. But I do want to ask you, for a school like an East Tennessee State or an Appalachian State, do you think that there is a place for FCS football, or should FCS programs, let's say like ETSU, where Randy Sanders is, should they maybe be thinking in the long term about trying to become bigger and trying to emulate an Appalachian State or even West Virginia when you were there?
Well, let's say example for East Tennessee,
Mm-hmm.
Tennessee State, they got to have an administration that wants it. Two, you got to have money. You got to have people with money to support it. Because
Yeah.
you have the money, you can't do it. So if East Tennessee had a president or administration that we want to go big time, and he's willing to do what it takes by that, I mean, getting enough booster money, and he can't do that unless he has enough boosters with the money. I would imagine Virginia Tech is pretty well financed.
Sure.
For their engineering school and their professional schools they've had up there. And but if East Carolina had that, and they had a president that wanted it, and they had alumni and boosters that could pay for it, they could go. It's a beautiful part of the country. I mean, it could attract a lot of boys.
I wanted to, you mentioned, thank you, Bobby Bowden. Anyway, I wanted to ask, you mentioned Virginia Tech, and of course, it used to be that Virginia Tech, West Virginia were annual rivals. That's kind of broken off, although they are playing each other occasionally again. But you always kept the rivalries together, Florida, even when Florida and Miami fell apart. Why? Because I see the demise of Texas A&M, or Pitt and Penn State, or West Virginia and Pitt, somebody like that, and it really saddens me. Tulane and LSU, for that matter.
Yeah.
Why did you find it was important for Florida State to always play Florida and always play Miami?
That's the way it is here. We always, once we started, we've always done that. We're gonna play now. Florida don't play both of us. They don't play Miami.
Sure.
They just play Florida State. And we play both of them. And I say that because back during the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
Miami is always in the top 2 or 3 in the nation. Then the 90s, Florida was up there. We had to play them every damn year, both of them. For the last 7, 8 years, they've been down. But I think Miami's about to come back, and I think Florida with this new coach will come back. Florida State too, and I'm anxious to play Monday night against Virginia Tech and find out what we got.
Sure. Well, that's another thing. Virginia Tech's the other program around here. So, like I said, I like to have a former coach of the team that Tennessee, and for that matter, Virginia. That the tradition was why you were going to play Florida and Miami, no matter how good they were, no matter what kind of a challenge they were. Was that something you sought out, that challenge?
Hey, all of that was put together before I got there.
Okay.
All put together before I got there.
Okay, I get that. So, I mean, in other words, that was something that you were told, we're going to keep doing this at Florida State. This is our identity. We're going to play Miami and Florida every year. Intriguing. Okay.
Because you're going to get a lot of people there.
Yeah, exactly.
Those are money games. We play Florida and Miami, we're going to fill up. And they are too. And so, yeah, when I first came to Florida State back in 76,
Oh.
We had 6 with LSU away, no return. We had 2 with Ohio State away, no return. We had 2 with Michigan away, no return. We had 1 with Notre Dame away, no return. We had 3 with Arizona schedule. When I didn't set that up. The tough ones, no, I didn't schedule it. I adopted that.
Was that an intrigue, though, to recruit? You're going to play the best? Was that an intrigue to recruit?
We won most of them.
There you go. There you go. But was that an intrigue to recruit? I say, hey, you come here, you're going to play the best.
What's that now?
Was that an intrigue to recruit? In other words, you were coming into a losing program and say, hey, look, you're going to play the best here. You're going to be challenged. Would that be...
Big selling point.
Okay.
Selling point.
There you have it. Here I'm talking to Bobby Bowden because he's won. He's turned around programs, and my goodness, that's who Tennessee and Virginia Tech are playing this weekend in Charlotte, and for that matter, Tallahassee as well. Bobby Bowden, it's a delight to talk to you, and I really enjoyed this and such. I wish you best. I want to tell everybody there is the Bowden Dynasty. If you enjoyed this conversation, go to BowdenDynasty.com. He's got a DVD out. It's a story, and it'll be especially popular around here in the Bible Belt. It's a story of faith, family, and football. I bought it.
Well, it was built around the fact that we had 14 years in a row in the top 5 and won at least 10 games. If we'd had playoff back in those days, we'd have had a shot at quite a few of them. But then it built about the way we ran our program and how I introduced faith in a lot of these guys are. We've changed a lot out of everything, and I want to be sure my boys. I want to be sure my boys knew what's important in life.
There you go. Yes, and I mean that's going to be a very popular message in East Tennessee. So Bobby Bowden, thank you so much for joining me here on Tri-City Sports Now. I really enjoyed it, and we'll be back with a final note after this.
Good luck.
Well, there you go. I shall.